Bye-bye. Great, thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education on Thursday, January 12th, 3:40 in the afternoon. We are going to conclude our work today with Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. We have Scott Giles and Marilyn Cargill with us. And welcome to the two of you. We have 4 new senators on this committee, and and also 3 of whom this is their first time in the legislature, 1 of whom is in the House. So this I see as an opportunity to just meet the 2 of you, tell us what you do, tell us the work that VSAC does, and I'm sure we'll have some questions. And I see Mr. Little. I was wondering if you were going to join us. Great to see you, albeit virtually. Tom Little, who's the Vice President and General Counsel for VSAC. So, Mr. Giles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to kind of begin just really by acknowledging it was kind of a pleasure to, it's hard to follow the Chancellor and the President. They did an outstanding job.
They did an excellent job.
Really kind of presenting things, but as somebody who has had the opportunity to work within.
And Ms. Lavaster also.
I'm sorry. As somebody who's had the opportunity to work within higher education, in Vermont for a while, and as the Chancellor indicated, I had the opportunity to serve on the select committee and have some understanding of the challenges that they in particular face. I just want to acknowledge the extraordinary work that is taking place, right now to bring about what I think will be a new institution or set of institutions that will offer incredible value proposition to Vermont students that will, really kind of provide tremendous opportunity for Vermonters, but I think we'll be able to compete with any of the regional education institutions, in our region when they're done. And so much of that work is hard and invisible. So I, would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that at the outset. And the other thing, just before jumping into a little bit of a, explanation of who we are and what our role for the new members, Chairman Campion, I wanted to thank you for the leadership and support that you've provided us as an organization and our students over the course of the last several years. We are going to have the opportunity to report back on several of those initiatives that you supported, and we're extraordinarily excited by what they have produced for Vermonters and how they will really kind of support the higher education and workforce development infrastructure within the state. So, with that kind of set aside, VSAC is a little bit of an unusual organization, and I kick things off by acknowledging that we do many things, and people tend to know us based on the service or the program that they engaged in, and not have a complete picture of the full work that we do. And so the way I like to start off is doing a kind of quasi-mythological history of the organization that really describes our evolution over time, but will give me a chance to share functionally the role that we play. So if you kind of roll back to 1965,
Jeez, oh God. It may say 1992 or something like that.
I'm going to roll back to 1965.
No, good year.
For Governor Phil Hoff, was the state was like many states in the country had become to appreciate fully the critical importance that education and training after high school played for creating economic opportunity, as well as for economic development. And this is, a lesson that was learned in 1965 and one that we are relearning now. And VSAC was really created out of that, in part to administer the financial aid programs that would address the inequities in access to post-secondary education. So we started with 2 functions. One was to administer the state grant program, which is a need-based aid program that goes to low and lower middle income students of all ages seeking to pursue education or training after high school. And then we served as this technical is what's called a guarantee agency for what was then the fledgling federal family education loan program. And at that point in time, our focus was really on the finance side of kind of creating education and training opportunity. As we administered those programs over time, we discovered something that is probably pretty self-evident now, that you can make education finance available. But if a student comes from a family that didn't have access to or exposure to post-secondary education, accessing this whole system and process is extraordinarily kind of difficult and complicated. And in the early 70s, we became one of the first states in the country to participate in what was called the Talent Search Program. We still continue to participate in that. We've got a federal grant that allows us to put a counselor in 83 middle school and high schools kind of across the state of Vermont, whose role is to provide support to first-generation low-income students in each of those schools. Early on in their careers, we'll help begin doing work, providing kind of what I'll call very, kind of basic career and education counseling. We are not helping people decide, in 8th grade, what it is that they're going to do. But we are opening their eyes to the kind of broader world of work, because if you are living in a rural community, your family did not have any educational opportunities after high school, your world of work opportunity is really defined by what is immediately around you. So we will work with them to kind of broaden their perspectives on what might be possible. And then our goal is to help them develop the skills to be able to link the education or training that they will need in order to be able to successfully pursue those kind of career goals that they might develop over time, with the understanding that that will change over time. But what we're really focused on, is a skill. So we provide career and education counseling to middle school and high school students, but as we all know, they're not the only potential students that are really struggling or wrestling to be able to identify ways that they can create greater economic opportunity for themselves and for their families. And so we have a parallel program that we run for adults. And in each of these programs, our counselors live and work in the communities that they serve. So we've got counselors working in regions all around the state. For the middle school and high school students, I think of them as itinerant counselors. They've got caseloads in different schools that they will going to be working in to kind of provide them the guidance and support. And so that guidance and support may start in middle school, carry all the way through high school, where we will help them with the entire process. What are your career goals? What education or training might you need? What institutions or programs are available within the state and outside of the state? How do you apply for? And then, of course, the part that we started with, really, how do you pay for it? And we will kind of help them kind of throughout that entire process navigate what is still a very complicated process to do all
that. I just want to I didn't introduce him, but and I'm sorry, Hayden Ross is a senior. I don't know if you know, at Spalding High School, and here on part of Flexible Pathways, and is going through this process. So it's particularly helpful to us to have Hayden, who has got applications in, if you don't mind just kind of figuring it all out. And so it's firsthand experience.
And really, one way that I would describe it is our role is to provide support to to Hayden. And while I will touch on this in a little bit more detail, we provide very, very comprehensive services that are targeted towards those first generation and low income students. But we also provide services to students in really every high school across the state. Our counselors go in and do paying for college nights, each of the schools, financial aid forums nights, and we do that both in person, in the building, and we do it remotely now. As I think the Chancellor and President Graywell said, one of the benefits of the pandemic in the end was that all of us had to make a pivot to hybrid in some way or another, and it allowed us to build and transform and expand the reach of our services and our expertise. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the programs that we kind of offer, having provided that kind of broad historical perspective. The one thing that I do want to add before I move on really ties nicely into the conversation that we've been having about workforce development. So much of the work that we have done historically, is very, very closely tied with traditional higher education. And what gets lost in that conversation, both when I'm presenting and others, is that we are very, very actively involved in providing support for workforce development. And where VSAC 25 or 30 years ago, when we described ourselves, would have focused entirely on, when we said post-secondary education, we would have meant predominantly more traditional education pathways. Now that means something much broader and includes the support that we provide for individuals and students of all ages that are pursuing non-degree certificates and training programs and apprenticeships. And I will say we do this all in close partnership with all of the higher education institutions and the kind of training providers within the state. Programmatically, I'm going to touch on a couple, kind of big, kind of major programs. We do administer the state's 529 plan, which is the college savings plan. It's one of the quiet successes within the state of Vermont. Right now, we have roughly 27,000 accounts, and Vermonters currently have invested about $530 million in that program. And it is now, Marilyn can correct me on my numbers, but I think last year Vermonters withdrew almost $60 million from that program in order to pay for education. And excitingly, the things that you can use that for were expanded to include registered apprenticeships, so that that is a kind of saving vehicle and investment vehicle for families that are, interested in that. I mentioned our
there on the just on that topic. Are you getting families, first generation, lower income families that are starting these 529s? Because I can see where it's really empowering. If you're a high school senior, now you've got some real money that you can go out with. I can also see where all of a sudden, geez, so-and-so's not going to give you your any financial aid your first year, but I can also see where it's empowering.
Yeah, I would say that one of the challenges we have, the low income families don't have the kind of additional resources, often to save. So we have programs that are targeted towards working with and communicating, kind of with all of our families to create these opportunities. But this program, full disclosure, tends to be a middle income and upper middle income.
I started a 529 plan for each one of my grandchildren. So,
And I have one for my daughter.
That's great.
That's fabulous. And, going back to the power of the savings plan, when you take a look, saving as little as about $250 in a savings account for a student of really, kind of any background, dramatically increases the likelihood that they will participate in some form of post-secondary education. It's almost a 20% bump in likelihood. People say, how could a small dollar amount? It's because the expectation that has been created and the conversations that start happening within the household about about a young student's future. We provide career and education counseling to about 6,500 students kind of across the state in one form, or another. I mentioned our financial aid informs nights. Marilyn will talk in more detail about the various grant programs that we administer. Importantly, I'll call out one, just really emphasizing the workforce development component. Marilyn will talk more about the outcomes, but Vermont was one of the first in the country to create a non-degree grant program targeted towards adults. Originally, it was for unemployed adults. Then it was expanded to include underemployed. It's one of the more powerful tools that we have, in addition to counseling, to supporting adults that are seeking really to create new opportunities for themselves, in their families. 802 Opportunity Grant we administer. This is something that the committee was very, very actively involved in last year. We are very, very excited about this. I'll give the headline so that I don't take away entirely from Marilyn's part of the presentation, but one of the functions that we perform is providing research in kind of higher education and post-secondary policy. And one of the things that we as a state have focused on over time is that we have very high high school graduation rates, but our post-secondary education going rates are relatively low. When you dig in and dissect the data very closely, part of the predominant thing that is driving that is that our two-year college going rates are about half the national average. Part of this is a regional trend. So in New England, there's a greater emphasis on four-year institutions. But drawing on that particular research, we came back to the committee with a proposal to create 802 Opportunity, which was an additional scholarship that would, in its first year, allow a student coming from a family earning less than $50,000 to be able to go to CCV tuition and fee free. Last year, we were able to increase that to 75,000, and it has been extraordinarily successful in its uptake. And I think as Catherine had shared the enrollment numbers, in a cycle in which community colleges across the country saw 20% declines in enrollment, CCV actually saw an increase in enrollment during this period of time.
So community colleges across the United States saw a decline.
20% decline over the COVID period.
Wow.
And there are many programs that you all supported and funded that contributed to this, but we're excited about what 802 Opportunity has kind of delivered. Because of the financial aid infrastructure we have, we also serve as the administrator of about 150 public and private scholarship programs. So if you are a kind of, it could be a Rotary Club in a particular community that has a small scholarship that they are looking to award, but they don't have the capacity to be able to sort through applications and do the evaluation portion of it, or particularly assess the financial need of particular candidates. We may administer that, and we have a range of scholarships from, I think, $1,000 scholarships, looking to Marilyn, who runs all these programs, to foundations that will have us administer or award, upwards of $1.5 million in scholarship dollars. And of course, in the workforce space over the course of the pandemic, we have been actively working with the committee and others to take on kind of special public scholarship programs that we can touch on in areas like nursing and mental health counseling and other places there.
Anything in teaching?
We have been in conversations with you and with our colleagues at kind of Vermont NEA about the models that we have available that might be kind of utilizable if the legislature is interested in providing additional support. We do have some private scholarships, at a small scale that are designed to support students that are interested in pursuing education, but nothing at the scale that is designed to address the magnitude of the problem that we face right now.
Scott, there's also the early childhood education forgivable loan program that is focused on teaching, but teaching in that pre-K 3-4-year-old up to, I believe, 6 or 7 years old.
I wonder if it's now reversed, that we have more of a teacher crisis than we do a nursing crisis. It's 1,000 openings. That's huge.
Yeah. And then I think that the last two things that I will kind of touch on, just a broad overview on the kind of the finance side. We do kind of offer it's called the VSAC Advantage Loan. It's a state administered kind of supplemental loan available to Vermont students and any student who is attending a Vermont institution. We have kind of a Vermont nexus for this. Catherine was touching on this kind of the student loan, the way student loan packaging is done. The federal student loan program has essentially aggregate and annual caps in the amount that students can borrow. The annual cap for a 4th or 5th year student is, I think, still $7,500. They were looking at trying to increase that. That dollar amount is not always enough for a student to be able to afford, after their other financial aid, attendance at the institution that best meets their needs. And each year we will originate roughly kind of $38 to $40 million worth of kind of supplemental loans. Our supplemental loans, because we use tax exempt financing, and this is kind of an important part of the the social benefit corporation that we function as part, we are allowed to keep 2% of the interest rate that is charged on a student loan kind of by tax law. That 2% can be used to both service that loan and administer all of VSAC's programs. So through that 2% historically, we have been able to administer all of the state programs essentially at no cost to the state. There's a small amount that we draw. We have the authority to draw out of the grant program, I think up to 7% for the administration of those programs, but we've been able to use the student loan revenue that we have generated historically to be able to allow us to deliver 100% of the aid that you all provide to us directly into the hands of students. And we are kind of providing the support and servicing a portfolio. There's a kind of roughly 500 million loans that were originated over a 25 or kind of 30 year period. If for whatever reason, and there's some, for those of you that have familiarity with kind of bond financing, if we, for whatever reason, are earning more than the 2%, we have a choice. We can return that to the IRS, or we can rebate that to borrowers. And historically, over the last, I think, 18 years now, we have rebated or done essentially loan forgiveness in the amount of about $190 million to kind of, Vermont borrowers as kind of part of our programming. So what I'd like to do is just kind of pause there, and I'm going to, jump around and just touch on a couple of key program areas that I wanted to highlight from a quality perspective. I will jump to page 5. Kind of focusing in VSEC.
They're not numbered.
So,
Saving for the future generation.
VSEC student outreach.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
It's very faint.
Yes,
I'm
thank you.
making a note that in the future we will bold our numbers. We talked earlier, about the challenges that first generation kind of students in particular face, and what I use this oftentimes as an analogy for folks. If you had a parent that had some post-secondary education or experience, and I ask you, and we survey every high school senior in the state, every 2 years we do a survey. If I ask somebody who has a parent that went on to post-secondary education when they decided what they were doing, they will say some version of I always knew. And the chances that the likelihood that a student who has a parent who has a college degree of some level goes on is kind of, extraordinarily high. What we see when we look at first generation students, those conversations will either be, I always knew because there was a parent that was very, very focused on creating a different set of opportunities for them, or they will say some version of, I made my decision really late in high school. And one of the things that we run into with first generation low income students is that oftentimes they will not make a decision regarding whether or not they will need education or training after high school until they are in their sophomore or their junior year of high school, at which point they may have already made course selection decisions that make it almost impossible for them to be able to successfully pursue their kind of education goals or dreams. Part of what we are trying to do in our programs is have that conversation with first gen low income students early enough so that they've got the full universe of opportunities in front of them. And what we wanted to share some statistics on this. If you are a first generation student from a free and reduced lunch eligible family, the likelihood that you will go on to some form of post-secondary education after high school is about 37%. The Vermont state, the statewide continuation rate is about 55%. For our talent search students, just to put things in perspective, which is our most intensive kind of one-on-one program, that group goes on at a 70% rate. So I wanted to share these numbers to show how much impact you can have when you are able to kind of work with students early enough and intensely. I will kind of, move to kind of the next page and really touch on our adult outreach program.
Before you do that, can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about your outreach program for kids on free and reduced lunch? I mean, I'd love to come back in a few years and see that at 50%, for example.
So there are two things that we are doing. We are working directly with a cohort of students within those schools that are both first generation and free and reduced lunch eligible. And what you are seeing there is the, for our Gear Up program, which is is a federally funded program. Our career and education outreach programs are almost entirely funded through competitive federal grants that we compete for each year. The Gear Up program, we see about a 20% increase in the post-secondary education college going rate of the students that are participating in that program. If they're in the talent search program, we're seeing about nearly a 40% increase in their rate. The question that we always have in front of us, which I think you're leaning into, is our ability, the size of our caseload is really determined by the resources that are available to kind of provide support, both in terms of hiring counselors and kind of the ancillary supports that are provided. And that's the thing that we are always wrestling with. How can we find additional resources to be able to expand the reach of the services?
So if we were to go back 5 years, has it been at 37%, or would we have seen an increase, or?
I think in the general population, there are two trends that we are seeing happen simultaneously. One is that the percentage of Vermonters who have a post-secondary credential is increasing over time. So what we are seeing on the back end is an increase in the college attainment rates. So if I take a look at a high school class, I think one of the indicators that I would look at is that if we had looked 10 years ago, just to give me a window that's kind of long enough, the mix of kind of first generation, high school students that identify as being first generation relative to the mix of high school students who would have identified as being second generation, who had a parent with an education degree, that gap is narrowed pretty substantially. And we are starting to move towards a point where we can envision a future in which the majority of our students that we are serving in high schools have a parent that has an academic credential of some type. So I think we're making progress in that way. The free and reduced lunch eligible population as a group carries with it a whole set of challenges that by itself, aren't addressed unless they're participating in one of our programs.
Yes, Senator.
No,
Okay.
shocking.
Kind of stepping into this, I'll kind of move into the adult outreach program, because that's the next piece. And I'll just say a couple of things about that. The definition of adult, in this world is, always a little bit, complicated, particularly in the higher education space. But, largely these are individuals who, for whatever reason are separated from high school. They're 18 years or older. There are exceptions to that occasionally, depending on what's been happening in their family. And one of the things that we will, that I'll in the ages of the adult students that we serve span from 18 to 60, depending on, kind of what it is that has happened in their particular life. Most of the students that we are serving, we encounter in part because something in their life has changed. Something has happened that has either created a need for additional support. It may be a lost job. It may be something that has happened within their family structure. But it is kind of an event that has, resulted in some clarity that on their part that they need additional support. We collaborate very closely with the Department of Labor with regard to our programs. We cross-train and co-train each other's counselors so that we are each familiar with the programs that we are each offering, and also know when to refer somebody or jointly refer somebody to further counseling. These adults are seeking kind of the full range of things. Some of them may have had unsuccessful academic lives early on in their life and are, know that they want to pursue something that will require additional education and training, but are, very concerned that they will not be successful. Our counselors will work with them to kind of help identify and develop a path, help them, obtain the supports that they need and obtain the financial aid. And the paths that they will pursue will be anything from credentials. It could be individuals looking for CDL in order to be able to, work construction or drive a truck. It could be an LNA, or it could be somebody who starts down one of these pathways, particularly the allied health, discovers that they have a real, aptitude and, will complete that certificate work and then pursue more education.
I'm just wondering if post the Great Resignation, if you all are seeing any kind of an uptick in adults looking for certification or some.
We are. I don't know whether it is the post, the Great Resignation as much as it is the upheaval that the pandemic created economically for folks, particularly individuals that were in hospitality and in some of the retail positions where positions were lost during the pandemic. And their sense of the stability of those opportunities has been pretty profoundly shaken. And so I do, we are seeing a lot of interest, particularly from adults and many kind of, single mothers in their late 20s and early 30s who are, who I think have taken from the pandemic, a belief in the critical importance of upskilling in order to be able to gain economic security. And Marilyn, when she shares some statistic about the advancement grant, which is one of the entry-level tools we use for kind of helping them obtain education or training, we see high demand for that, particularly from this group right now. I want to be kind of mindful of your time, and I'll just touch on two things, Marilyn, and then turn it kind of over to you. Research and evaluation, I did touch on this before. Chairman Campion, you're very familiar with the work that we do. I do want to make us, just let you know that you have a resource available to you if you would like it. We have access to some relatively unique sets of data. So one, we administer all the state grant programs, all the state financial aid programs. And so we have pretty significant insight into the financial challenges and opportunities that students across the state are facing. And it's not uncommon for us to come in and share more detailed information about the challenges and the successes that Vermont students are having financing their education. I mentioned the senior survey. Every 2 years, we attempt to survey every high school senior in the state. And this is a kind of a joint activity partnering with the Vermont high schools and the Agency of Education. We've been administering this survey for over 30 years. So we've got kind of 30 years of kind of collected data. And the data itself, the questionnaire really collects maybe 3 large buckets of information. One is information that's important to the high schools about the student experience in high school. There's a lot of school climate related survey information that we collect. We also collect as part of that detailed information about students' post-secondary education goals and plans. Are they thinking about going on to some form of education training? Are they going into the military? Are they going into the workforce? And we are able to take that information and then we follow that up to 1 to 2 years later, kind of depending on the timing and availability of data, to actually, at least for those that are pursuing post-secondary education, we are able to test whether they actually pursued their educational opportunities. And we have, at the request of the state, done fairly detailed, research and analysis, program evaluation on some of our own programs. But we've mentioned in here, just as an example, we took the high school class of 2012 to take a look at our historical and longitudinal data, to take a look at not just what their post-secondary education goals were, but to actually take a look and see how successful they were in pursuing them over a 6-year period. And we could do that analysis, taking a look at, looking by high school and by the institution they enrolled in. And that research itself was pretty groundbreaking in the state of Vermont and really led to a lot of the work that's being done at the state colleges and elsewhere, taking a look at retention, improving retention and graduation rates at the post-secondary education level. So I mentioned that in part just to let you know that these are resources that are available to you as you develop policy. So I've gone longer than I meant to, Marilyn, but I will turn it over to you.
You are the president, you get that option.
Did you have a question?
Can I make just look at announcement?
Yes, please.
Our committee, if you all are available at 4:30, I do think it's important for us to go to the making decision presentation upstairs.
Oh, yes, that is, yeah. For those interested,
If
we should be
possible.
done at 4:30.
Yeah, if it's possible.
We'll also
We
hear
have a
about
full
this tomorrow.
15 at the pavilion. We're supposed to be there for the
Oh, is that
governors.
tonight? Is there one of those two? All right, well, we'll have to divide.
They
the
do
talk
record
then.
those.
Yeah, they do.
They do?
I think they will record them. And we'll have them in tomorrow. too.
Okay, oh, okay.
Good.
I will move you along as
Okay,
quickly
you're
as I
good.
can. So let me just introduce you to the state grant programs that are funded by the Vermont legislature. So we have a full-time, a part-time, and the advancement grant, which Scott has talked about. Full-time is exactly what it sounds like. These are students, primarily high school recent graduates, who go right into college and they go on a full-time basis, which is greater than 12 credits. We also offer a part-time program because we wanted to make sure that adults had options to access higher education. And most adult students tend to be part-time students. They're still working and they still have their whole lives going on. So that's anything less than 12 credits. These are need-based programs, so we do have students fill out the pre-application for federal student aid to determine eligibility. So these are very targeted programs. And as Scott said, these are targeted to low-income and moderate-income families. Advancement grants are, as Scott described them, this is where students who can do two things with them. You can take a training program that has nothing to do with higher education at all, or you can use them to test the waters of higher education. So about 2/3 of our students use them for training programs, but the other third are adults who were perhaps not successful that first time they tried college, or they never tried it at all. And the thought of filling out an SAT and applying to a school for admission is like never going to happen. But if they can take 1 or 2 classes without any risk financially, because the grant covers the whole cost, then they step into those programs to prove to themselves they can do it. And this has been very successful in both of those areas. The last grant I want to mention is fairly new. It was started a number of years ago because the colleges came to us, speaking of retention, and they were saying, we are losing students, not because they couldn't pay their bill, but because they got into school and then something happened, something unexpected happened. And for us, it might be considered a very small expense, but they blew a tire and they had to buy a tire. Their computer needed repair. Those $200-300 expenses, they could not come up with the money for that and stay enrolled. And so the school said, could you do any type of a small grant in an emergency situation to stop a student from dropping or stopping out of school? We started those programs, actually it was very fortuitous. We started them just before the pandemic. So during the pandemic, the use of this program for all of the students who had no idea they needed remote learning, and the number of students who did not have computers, they did not have printers at home, they did not have internet, came after this money. But even this year, we've already awarded $55,000 in $400 or less scholarships to keep these students enrolled. So it's a very successful program. Students must be nominated by someone on the college campus, a faculty or staff member, or by one of our outreach counselors.
Thank you. So sorry, when you say this year, are we talking calendar year or school year, the 55,000?
This current year right here, in this year so far, so we're 4 months in, we've done
Fiscal year.
$55,000 in this school year
Got you.
for
Okay,
students. So
thank you.
since June, since July 1.
Great.
So faculty, staff can nominate students to get this?
Yeah, so in fact, students frequently will go to someone on their campus
Yeah.
to say, I'm in trouble, I don't know what to do. That faculty member can now write a letter to DSAC saying, I'm nominating Marilyn Cargill for this. This is the problem that she's facing. We write the check directly to the student. We don't do anything else. We've got someone on the campus who is verifying that this is real. We've got an emergency situation, and we do not go through I send it to the school applies it to your bill. If your bill is paid, they write a refund check. That's not going to help for someone who needs a snow tire in the morning.
Yeah.
So the check goes directly to the student, and it's a very fast turnaround program.
What kinds of things are you seeing?
What kind of issues?
Yeah.
So computer repair has been big. Actually, car repair, snow tires, blown tires, anything you can think of with transportation, especially with our adults. Food insecurity during holidays. If you think about it, the college closes down and is closed down for a month.
Yeah.
If you've got a foster youth, for example, we had situations where they were allowed to stay on campus, which was lovely, but their food service is shut down. And so we had a student write to us who said, I'm working at a restaurant and they allow me 1 meal a day, but I'm hungry. Can you help me? You bet.
So 55.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You bet. So can I send $200 to someone so they can buy groceries for 2 weeks? You
No
bet.
questions asked, great.
Yeah, and if I can just give a shout out to Marilyn and her team here, this issue is first identified in research, then the schools were coming to us saying, can you do something? We had to come up with a way that would be responsive to the immediate, it's an emergency grant, and Marilyn and her team found a way to allow us to validate that it's a real person, a real issue, but get the money into the hands of the student really, really quickly, because as any of us know, if you're a student who is struggling, missing a week or 2 weeks of class puts you behind the 8 ball in a way that you may never recover from. And so the real trick has been to find a way that was both responsible and responsive and move quickly. And you guys did an amazing job.
Another example, Chairman Campion, would be a book that was unexpected. We all know how expensive textbooks can be. And if all of a sudden it's like, oh, we didn't mention it, but we want you to get this book as well, and it's $280 or whatever it is. That's the other type of thing we see. We've seen some medical requests. Those are really the biggies.
55,000 since September to now.
In $400 or less, $400 or less is the maximum grant. We've spent $55,000.
Thank you.
So next page just talks a little bit about the targeting of the advancement grant very quickly. The average person that is receiving an advancement grant is female. She's 35. She is supporting 1 child, and she makes an income under $24,000 a year. So this money is really looking to help very, very low income Vermonters improve their life through education, whether they're using it to take a certificate course and go on to get a new job, or whether they're looking at it to actually enter a higher education institution. The next slide or page is 802 Opportunity. I just want to spend a minute on this. This is one of VSAC's priorities for this year. Scott talked a little bit about this. This is our newest grant program. It is a phenomenal partnership between VSAC and the Community College of Vermont. Every Vermonter this year who earns less than $75,000 can attend CCV tuition free. So I've got a lot I want to say about this slide. I'm going to skip it because of where we are time-wise, but the bottom line is this program is so simple, right? There's lots of things, there's lots of need-based programs, and if you fill out all the forms, this is, do you make less than $75,000 in your family? Yes, you can go for free. It's that simple, and CCV and VSAC have just been floored by the number of students who stepped up to this. Half of their degree enrollment last year used 802 Opportunity. And one of the things that we talked about, Catherine mentioned that they're seeing the private loans decrease at all institutions. This program was about access, and it was about affordability. At CCV, their federal loans have actually decreased by 45%. So their students are not even needing to use federal loans to attend CCV because this program is covering it.
When does this run out? What was the funding?
It's funded through this current year that we're sitting in right now.
Okay.
So that's why we are asking for 2 things on this one. We're asking for the funding, but we're also asking for this to be added to VSAC's base to make it permanent funding.
And these were general fund dollars.
Senator Weeks.
Just out of curiosity, what's the benefit to the student, like per student roughly for this tuition? Is it
So
5,000?
So we build this on top of existing awards. So first we look at their Pell Grant, then their VSAC grant, and then we award 802 Opportunity. So the average award right now is about $3,000 that a student is receiving.
Does it come with any strings like work study? Or?
There are not strings with this one. We'll talk about a number that are forgivable loan programs. This one is not. The other thing that I'll say very quickly about this program, you can do one of 3 things with it. You can look at it for certificate programs at CCV. You can use it to get an associate's degree at CCV. And we are also seeing that a large number of students use it to get their first 2 years without having to borrow. And then they're transferring to a 4-year institution. UVM quotes that CCV is their largest source of transfer students. So the consortium agreement between UVM and CCV, you were talking about that a little earlier. What do some of these relationships look like? That is one of the very strong relationships that exists between the state colleges and the University of Vermont. And as Catherine or Sophie mentioned, they can also go to one of the 4-year institutions that are part of the Vermont State College system as well. There's a few facts that I won't stop on the next slide, but showing you the outcome, it's really been pretty phenomenal, the success of the students that use this money and their commitment to take advantage of this. The next program that where my time is,
You're good.
2 minutes. All right.
You're good.
The next program I want to mention is the Vermont Trades Program. This is a program that was created last year by the legislature and the governor's office. And this particular program is a forgivable loan program. We run a number of these on behalf of the state of Vermont, but we thought we would highlight the trades because this is another one of our priorities for this year. This particular program, so a forgivable loan program, it works like a scholarship at the beginning in that it pays full tuition for the student at their training program. And then it says the student must sign a promissory note that says, I will work in Vermont for 1 year in the field in which I was trained for each year that I receive funding. If they do that, then this is always a scholarship. It does not change. If they do not do that, then we enforce the promissory note and this becomes a loan that has to be repaid.
Very quick question. Medical trades, does that cover nurses?
It's not nursing. There is actually a nursing program, but it does cover things like phlebotomy that come under medical trades. Some of the respiratory careers come under medical trades.
And how challenging would it be to start including nurses in that? Because I know that's one of the sectors that's really hurting for people.
Well, the only reason I would say you've already covered it is your answer. There is a nursing forgivable loan program as well that is about $2 million a year that is only for nursing students and it covers their full tuition.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just give us a sense of how many students are not sticking around and therefore that becomes a loan and not a?
Well, I can give you, so this program is so new
Okay.
that we've only been running this for 4 months. You guys approved this last spring. It started in September. So we don't have any data on this one, but the nursing program's been around for 20 years. 85% of the students who receive those nursing loans pay them off by working in Vermont. So that's a very high percent of students that are fulfilling the work obligation that we're looking for.
Sure. Why don't you're on a roll.
Okay. So, happy to give it back to you, sir. So very quickly, this is our budget request and all of our priorities on the very last page. We will be looking for level funding. That's what we are requesting for the grant programs. That's the full-time, part-time, and advancement grants and emergency loan that we talked about. As I mentioned, we are asking for the $3.4 million that we use for 802 Opportunity to be level funded for this upcoming year, but also to be added to base so that it is a permanent program. As you can imagine, we have students right now asking us, will this program be available for me next year?
Right.
And we're answering them right now. We don't know. We're talking to the legislature. We're advocating for it, but we will not be able to tell you the answer to that for a while. So. And then in addition to that, a few other programs that are funded through VSAC. VSAC does administer the dual enrollment stipend program. This is what allows high school students who take dual enrollment courses to get a stipend to help offset book and travel expenses. And that was one of the things the legislature realized when the program was originally started. It was leaning very heavily to upper income and middle income students taking advantage of the vouchers. Lower income families couldn't because they couldn't afford the other parts of going on to take those college courses. We also are asking for funding for our aspirations program, which supports schools in developing systems that really find an outcome for every student in their high schools, that they make sure when a student's graduating, they have a college plan, they have a training plan, they have a military plan, they have a plan that's going to move them forward in their career. And the last thing that we are asking for is the $3 million to continue the Vermont Trades Program. We aren't asking for nursing or early childhood education, just because we believe that there are going to be advocate groups in here that will ask for those things on behalf of the state, but those are also programs that we run. We're just starting ones for a mental health program, and we're also starting one for nurse faculty.
And that's really a workforce development tool, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, what we've identified as priorities, so the community understands, are those programs that if we don't advocate for them, there may not be other voices. We have a number of programs. We administer the National Guard,
Right.
kind of scholarship kind of programs, the nursing and a number of the others, and we know that the folks that are the primary sponsors of those will be in here advocating for them.
Please, just one quick
Yes, please,
question.
sir.
I may have misunderstood early on in the briefing that the 2% on top, 2% charged to the loans paid for the other programs. That 2% benefit paid for the other programs. Maybe I misunderstood the intent of that comment.
What I was simply sharing about the kind of synergy with our student loan programs is that because we, as a instrumentality of the state, have the ability to use tax exempt financing in order to offer low cost education loans as supplements to the federal program. One of the conditions of that program is that we may retain no more than 2% of the interest that we charge in support of the administration of our programs.
Right.
What that has historically allowed us to do is to use a portion of that revenue to pay for or offset the costs of administering the full range of programs that the state asks us to administer.
Okay.
And which has in turn allowed us to take a program like the state grant program or 802 Opportunity, and rather than drawing an administrative charge against that, which we are entitled to do by law, we're able to deliver 100% of the state resources directly to students. Does that answer the question that you're?
We'll come back to it.
Okay, I'm glad to provide greater detail. If I can just close with one observation, going back to the conversation that you all had with the state university, I do think one of the, there are a couple of bright things, positive things that came out of the pandemic, from that. One is that there's a greater spirit of collaboration amongst not just the agencies that we partner with, because we are the quintessential partnership entity where we have a foot in K-12, we have a foot in higher education, we're in workforce development, we're working with employers, we're in this spot. But everybody, because of necessity, has seen the value of partnering together. And we talked about 802 Opportunities, one example that's something supported across the entire higher ed community, because each one of us sees kind of value both to Vermont and to our own institutions in supporting it. But we're also seeing the proliferation of articulation agreements amongst the institutions that previously probably thought more of each other as slight competitors in some way, but now they're seeing ways to leverage each other's resources. And an example before the pandemic that I'm hoping we'll get back to, because just one example, was a partnership we all engaged in on the marketing side with travel and tourism, where we were marketing the higher education opportunities in Vermont in partnership with them collectively, recognizing that our ability to leverage the kind of the public recognition of the UVMs and the Middleburys and the Benningtons and the others brought students into a Vermont orbit who may not really in the end be interested in those institutions, but could find an institution in Vermont, Vermont State University, one of the colleges, one of our other independents, that would perfectly meet their needs. And, I think that as we go forward, those opportunities for collaboration are not just going to be available to us, but there's a hunger to engage them in a way that I've not seen in the past.
This has
You
been
can
very
start with,
helpful.
yeah, start with you. I'm going to leave these with Kate.
Terrific.
These are
Thank you.
handouts that give you some of the numbers about VSAC, but they also give you phone numbers and email addresses for Scott and I and some of our other execs. If you have any questions, we would be happy to come back. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Great, and this has been a great overview,
Yeah, thank you
incredibly
so
helpful.
much.
Thanks for everything that
Thank
you're
you.
doing. Committee, as we hear from folks, be thinking, I mean, one of the reasons we do this is to see if it generates ideas from all of you in terms of bills and priorities. And so we'll check in tomorrow. At some point, we'll keep an eye on the weather as well to see where everyone is with regard to anything you've heard that you need to hear more of, or, bill ideas, et cetera. So,
Sounds good.
okay,
Thanks.
thank you both.
Thank
Mr. Little,
you.
good to see you.